This is the 8th video of this video series on building an e-commerce website using React Redux, GraphQL, and Firebase. In this video tutorial, we're going to be looking at Redux hooks, specifically looking at the use selector and use dispatch hooks. And this is a follow-on from the previous tutorial where we looked at React hooks. But of course, as Redux is a separate library to React, I wanted to cover it in its own tutorial. Before we get started, I just want to encourage you guys to check out our official YouTube channel, that is youtube.com/simpletut. I also want to give you guys a direct link and a shout out to visit the official playlist for this video series. Of course, at the end of each of these videos, I am not only uploading it to YouTube, but I'm adding it to this playlist, which you can find by either visiting my channel directly, or I will be posting a link in the description of this video. Additionally, I want to let you guys know that there is an official GitHub repository for this project. You can find that on my official GitHub page. That's github.com/simpletut, and find this repository. Of course, I'm also going to be posting a direct link to this repo in the description of this video as well. And finally, of course, please do visit our official website, that is simpletut.com. But of course, I also want to ask you guys to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means a lot to me. But let's go ahead and make a start on this tutorial. In this video tutorial, I'm going to be talking to you about two Redux hooks. The first is use selector and the second is use dispatch. Now these do opposite things. Use selector is used to get data, retrieve it from the Redux store, and use dispatch is used to dispatch actions that will eventually update the Redux store. Now, apart from that, I'm also going to be refactoring the code within our application so that we can adhere more to the true design pattern, the true Redux design pattern. We're also going to be using Thunk middleware so that we can actually call functions within our functions, and that's how we're going to be working with dispatch as well. But we're going to cover that further into this tutorial. Now, before we get into any of that, I also want to talk to you about how I've structured this series and the last two tutorials. So in the at the start of this series, we were writing more traditional React code. We used functional components where we could, but where we needed things like lifecycle hooks or state, we actually started off writing classes. These are stateful components. And that's absolutely fine. And eventually we introduced Redux, where we had state management that allowed us to significantly improve our code. But as we've gotten deeper into this series, I wanted to give you guys as an in-depth understanding of React as a concept, in addition to actually the core project itself, which was building an e-commerce website. So what I've actually managed to do, and what I'm hoping to have done and achieved, is to also get to this point where we're looking at more cutting edge React code. We're now looking at using React hooks and Redux hooks, etc. going forward, which is why in the last video of this series, we refactored the components in our application to use React hooks. Now, what are React hooks? React hooks is basically functional components, but we use React hooks so that we can access and use state within our components, and also other hooks like use effect in place of things like lifecycle hooks. But of course, Redux is an entirely different library, and for that reason, I wanted to separate the refactoring of the Redux part of our code from the React hooks tutorial, which is why in this tutorial we're going to be covering Redux hooks. And that brings me to the first component that we're going to be refactoring, and of course the first Redux hook that we're going to be looking at, which is the use selector hook. And the first component we're going to be refactoring is our header component. And I want to demonstrate exactly why. So what we're currently doing in our application is we have some static links in the header, which is giving the user an option to either register or log in. If they log in, we offer them different links and we allow them to either visit their account page or to log out. Now, the way that we're doing this is we're getting the current user from the Redux store within this component, and then we're conditionally rendering different links. So let's come back over to our code and actually figure out how this is currently working. So let's go into our header component. And as you can see, we're using this connect function. Now, the connect function is technically, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it is working. I just demonstrated that. But of course, we're using React hooks. So we should be using Redux hooks because they work very well together, but they work slightly differently. So let me go ahead and show you how that works. So the first thing that we want to do is remove this connect function, because we don't need this anymore. We don't need to import that. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to completely remove this line of code. And instead of using that connect function where we export our component, I'm just going to go ahead and export the component. We don't need to do anything else there. Now, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is this map state to props function, because we actually still need this, but we're going to call it something a little bit different. But before I show you that, I'm going to cut it because I want to move this to the top of my file. And what I really want to focus on is the name that we've assigned this function, because I think that's the key to helping you guys understand exactly how this works. So previously, when we used this map state to props function, let's think about what we called it. We were mapping the state from our Redux store to the props of our component. Well, with the useSelector Redux hook, we're not mapping it to props anymore. In fact, we can just access the current user object directly. We can access it directly from state. So instead of saying that this is going to be called map state to props, we're just going to rename this to map state, because this is not going to be passed to the props. Of course, we need to import the hook itself. So we're going to import that from React Redux, which is called the useSelector hook. And what I'm going to do is, where we destructured the current user before from props, we're going to replace props with the useSelector hook. And we're going to call this as a function and pass it our map state function directly. And believe it or not, that's all you need to do. That's exactly how the useSelector Redux hook works. So I'm going to save those changes and I'm going to come over to my web browser and I'm going to sign in again using the same test account. So I have this account called joeblogs@outlook.com and I'm going to sign in with the same password. And you'll see that it works exactly the same. I'm redirected to the home page, and as you can see, the links in the header have updated, and if I log out, they change back. We're now ready to look at the second Redux hook that we're going to be using in this tutorial, which is the useDispatch Redux hook. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our sign-in component. So, of course, this is our form where we're calling handle submit. This is our asynchronous function. And currently we have a try catch here, which is where we actually handle signing in the user using the auth library from Firebase. Now we want to move this try catch into a new action that we haven't created yet. So in actuality, this function is not going to contain any asynchronous code. So we can remove this async keyword, but of course we still want to capture the event and we still need this line because it's preventing a page reload every time the user hits that submit button to log in. So now that we've commented that out, what we need to do is create the action that we're going to dispatch here. So to do that, we need to come over to the Redux folder, the user folder that contains the useractions.js file. Now currently all we have is this set current user action that we created in an earlier tutorial. And it's a much simpler function. So all an action is within the Redux ecosystem is a function that returns an object, and usually it contains just a type and a payload. Now in this case, the action that we need to create is a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to explain it as we go. So we're going to call this action sign in user, and it's going to take two things, which is the user's email and the user's password. And notice that I've destructured it here. We're also going to pass it dispatch, and this is obviously also going to be an async function, because this is where we're going to move our try catch to. Now before I take this code, I want to move this the call we make to reset the form and where we redirect the user. I want to move that outside of the try catch, but I'm going to comment it out for now. And again, it will become clearer why I've done that in just a few moments. So let's take the rest of this code, this try catch, and let's move it into our new action that we've created, our sign in user action. Now, as I said before, we're going to be using the use dispatch Redux hook. So let's implement that so that we can dispatch our action within our sign in component. So what we need to do is at the top of this file, we need to import two things. The first thing we need to import is going to be from React Redux, and that is going to be the use dispatch Redux hook itself. The second thing that we need to import is going to be the action that we just created itself. So that's going to be coming from Redux, user and user actions. And as you know, it's called sign in user. Now to use dispatch within our component, we need to, first of all, we need to create a const called dispatch, and that will equal, we can call the use dispatch hook. We call that as a function, and that will give us access to dispatch. And then we can use that to actually dispatch our action, the sign in user action that we created. And we'll call that as a function, and we'll pass it the email and password that we have from state. So we'll pass it email. We'll pass that as an object, so it'll be email and password. Add a semicolon. And that's all we need to do in order to dispatch this action. But the work isn't done yet. Now, the first thing I need to draw your attention to is our user actions. So as you can see, currently we're using this auth library from Firebase, but we haven't imported that into our actions file. So the first thing I need to do at the top of this file is import that from our Firebase utility file that we created in one of the first videos of this series. And of course, we are exporting this auth library. So this is our Firebase utility file. We created this in one of the first tutorials of the series. And as you can see here, we're exporting this auth library, which is what we're going to be using within our action here. Now, as I said, this is a slightly more complicated action that we're trying to dispatch here. But of course, if we sign in the user, there's no way for us to receive a callback from this function, right? So how would that work? Because we need to do two things. We need to reset the form, and we need to redirect the user once they've actually successfully signed in. I mean, that's what we were doing before, right? So what we actually need to do is we need to dispatch another action within our sign in user action that will update the store, and then we can subscribe to that within our sign in function. And when we detect a change and a success event, we know we can trigger these other events. So again, hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry, just follow what I'm doing. So let's come back here, And what we need to do first of all is create a new type. So let's come over to our user types file, and we'll create a new type, and we're going to call this sign in success. Okay, it's going to equal a string, which will just be the same. Now that we've created that, we can come over to our reducer, and we're going to create a new case, right? So the first thing we'll do is create some new initial state. So we'll just say sign in success, and we'll set it to false. And what we then want to do is create, as I said, a new case. So we'll say case user types sign in success. And in this case, we will return the state, but we're going to change the sign in success to equal the action dot payload. Save that. We've updated our reducer to handle this case. So what we can now do on our sign in user action is use the dispatch that we're passing to it. And what we want to dispatch is an action. And first of all, we need to define the type, which is again going to be user types dot sign in success, and the payload is going to be true, right? Because this is our success case, right? So now that we have this logic in our Redux store, we can come back over to our sign in component, and we're going to subscribe. We need to get the value of the sign in success from our Redux store. So to do that, I'm going to now import, in addition to use dispatch, the use selector Redux hook. And what that will allow me to do is above my component here, I'm going to create a new const, which is going to be called map state, right? We're going to get the user state. And then what we can do is we can get the sign in success from user.sign in success. And what that will allow us to do as well is to get that from the Redux store. So we can then call const equals use selector and pass it as a function, pass it our map state function. And we can destructure the value from that of sign in success. And then we can actually use that to detect when the user has successfully signed in. And we can do that using the use effect React hook. And the way that that will work, again, so up here, we're going to call use effect, and that takes a function and it takes a dependency. And what we'll do here is we're going to pass it the sign in success as a dependency. So whenever this changes, the value of sign in success, whenever this changes, and remember, by default, this is going to be false, because where we define our reducer, our sign in success is by default it's false. But when we actually sign in successfully, we dispatch another action that will change the value to true. So in the component, whenever this changes, we're going to have a condition here, which is whenever sign in success is true, evaluates to true, we can perform some kind of a success event. And this is where we want to call the code that will reset the form and push the user to whatever route we want when we sign in, which in this case is going to be the home page. So let's clean this up and save the file. And now I want to come over to the browser, and I'm going to show you something. And also, by the way, we're not using this auth middleware here anymore, so we don't need to import that anymore. Now let's come back over to the browser, and let's just reload, and let's come over to login, and let's try and log in with that test account again. So joeblogs@outlook.com, enter my password, and you're going to see that I get an error, and this is a very interesting error. And I deliberately I missed something out. I didn't tell you something because I really wanted to hit this error so I could make you understand exactly what I'm about to tell you. So let's read the error and figure out what it means. So it says actions must be plain objects. Use custom middleware for async actions. And it's highlighting this code here, which is where we dispatch the sign in user action. So let's come back over to the code here, and let's figure out what this means. So let's come over to our actions, and remember here, this action, right, which we know works, right, everything worked before, is a function that simply returns an object with a type and payload. But our sign in user action isn't. It's an asynchronous function that dispatches another function. So it actually, what effectively we're doing here is we not only have an asynchronous action here, but we're calling a function within a function. Now to do this, we need to use Redux Thunk middleware, right? Because and this is what we use Redux Thunk middleware for. And that's how we're going to fix this. So all we need to do, we need to install some new middleware, which is going to be called, npm install Redux Thunk, right? So this is the Thunk middleware we need. Once that's installed, let's just restart our application. So npm run start, and let's head back over to our text editor. Now that we have this new middleware, we need to pass it to our store. So let's come back over to our create store file. And as you can see, we have this middleware's array that we pass to this apply middleware function. So at the top of the file, we need to import this new middleware. So we're going to import Thunk from Redux Thunk. And then all we need to do is pass this Thunk middleware into our array. And of course, this is already taken care of. We passed this as an array originally because it allows us, and we knew we would want to pass more than one middleware to this store. So that's fine. So now let's come back over to the browser, and let's just reload it to make sure everything's nice and up to date. And now let's try and log in again. So we're going to say joeblogs, and again, this is my test account that I have locally. Just enter the password and log in, and you're going to see that again everything is working as it was before. The header updates, we can log out, everything's working the same. So let's come back over to our code, and as you can see, everything is working as expected. But if we look at our sign-in component, we have, again, simplified this component greatly. We've decoupled the logic that handles signing in the user. We've completely decoupled that from the component, which is really the true, much more in line with the true Redux design pattern and really how this component should have always been written. But again, I wanted to write it in this way so that I could gradually take you through the process, and I think in this way you'll gain a much greater understanding of how Redux works with React. Okay, so now that we've finished refactoring our sign-in component, let's come over to our sign-up component. And this is going to involve a lot of the same steps, but it's going to be a little bit different at the same time as well. So it's going to be interesting to refactor this component. So let's make a start. Now, just as the sign-in component, it has this form with an onSubmit event, which calls this handle submit function. Again, we're going to be removing this try catch and where we handle the errors. We're going to be removing this from this function entirely and moving it into another action. So again, it's not going to have any asynchronous code, so we can remove the async keyword. We still need the line that handles the event and preventing the default action. So again, we're ready to create our action. So let's come again over to our user.actions JS file. We're going to call this, well, we need to export it, but we're going to call this function sign up user. And again, this is going to be it's going to require a few more fields than just email and password. So looking at this, we have the display name, email, password, confirm password. So, and this is going to call a function which will accept a display name, an email, password, and a confirm password. Again, that will accept dispatch, and it will be an asynchronous function. And what we want to do is just copy for now this entire block of code and simply move it into our action. And for now, what we'll do is we'll just uncomment that and we'll just save that. And what we want to do is just import this into the component and dispatch that as an action within this handle submit function. So as we did before, what we'll need to do is import the same hook. So we want to import this from React Redux. We want to import the use dispatch Redux hook. And as we did before, again, we need to import the action that we just created. So it's going to be coming from Redux user actions, and it's called sign up user. And what we want to do within our component, we're going to call dispatch. So dispatch equals use dispatch, call it as a function. That gives us access to dispatch, so we can use dispatch and we can pass it our sign up user action, call it as a function, and we'll need to pass our display name, the user's email, password, and the confirm password as well. Now within our sign up user action, the first thing that we do is we compare the password with the confirm password. And if they don't match, then we attempt to show an error to the user, and we return out of this function immediately so that we don't proceed any further. Now, of course, this set errors function exists on our signup component, and we don't have access to it anymore within our signup user action itself. So we are going to need to replace this with, again, we're going to need to use dispatch to dispatch another action that we can subscribe to on our component. So let's come back over to our user types, and we want to add an additional type, and we're going to say sign up error, and it's going to equal a string. We'll pass it the same value as the key, and then we can come back over to our reducer, and we want to add some additional state, which is going to be sign up error. And again, by default, this is going to equal an array. And we need to add an additional case, which is going to be user types dot sign up error. And in this case, we will return again the state, and we will pass the sign up error, the action dot payload, and we can save that. And what we will now be able to do is come back to our sign up user function, and we can dispatch another action. We can give it the type of user types dot sign up error, and we'll give it the payload of our errors array. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've covered the error scenario, before we actually implement this into our component, I also want to cover the success scenario. So currently, just as we did before, we're using this auth middleware to register the user with the email and password, because we've already validated at this point. If we've got past this block, we validated that the password matches the confirmed password, so we can just continue. And of course, we have this handle user profile function that utility function that we're calling, and this currently does not exist within this file. We haven't imported it, and again, this handle user profile utility function is coming from our Firebase utilities file. This is another utility function that we created earlier in this series, in an earlier video tutorial. So we'll need to import this into this file, as obviously we've moved this logic out of the component. And then of course, again, we have some other events that we fire on the success case, which we're going to need to move out of our action. But of course, we need to dispatch a success event. So what we'll need to do is come back over to our user types file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new type, which is going to be sign up success. And again, it's going to have a value which will be a string, and we'll pass it the same name as the key. We'll then come over to our reducer, and we'll add another case, which is going to be user types dot sign up success. And in this case, what we're going to do is return an object with the state, but we're going to change the initial state, which we haven't created yet, which is going to be sign up success. By default, this will be false, but in this case, we're going to change it to equal, so sign up success, which will equal the action dot payload. Cool. So all we need to do at this point is dispatch that success action. So we can then dispatch this action. So again, the type here is going to equal the user types object, which has the sign up success, and the payload is going to equal true. Awesome. And again, we can just cut this here and save the changes to the file. Cool. So now that we've refactored the code here and we've created this action, let's now come back over to our sign up component and complete refactoring this component. So all we need to do is now subscribe to get those events, those changes from our Redux store. Now we don't need to import these two things from our Firebase utilities file anymore. We've removed that out of the sign up component itself, but we need to import, of course, from React the use effect hook, and also from React Redux we need to import the use selector. And the first thing we need to do is create that map state function. So map state equals, we'll destructure the user state, and then we need to get two things. First of all, we need to get the sign up success, which will be user.sign-up-success, and we need sign up error, which will equal user.sign-up-error. Awesome. So to actually get access to this, all we need to do is destructure that from use selector, and we'll pass it this map state function, and then we can just simply destructure it. So sign up success and sign up error. And then all we need to do within our component is use this use effect hook, which accepts a function and it takes the dependencies array, and we can perform these checks. So the first, we actually need to have two, and the first one will have a dependency of the sign up success, and the second will have a dependency of sign up error. So let's handle the success case. So if the sign up success is true and the user has successfully signed up, then what we'll need to do is pass it this reset function, which will reset the form, and additionally we need to push the user to the home page because they've successfully signed up. Now, regarding the error case, well, the checks we'll need to perform are going to be a little bit different. Now, of course, the default value here is going to be an empty array. So the first thing we need to check is that it is a valid array. So we'll say array.isArray, and we'll pass it the sign up error. And then the additional check we need to do is we need to check that sign up error.length is greater than 0, which means that it has returned an error. Now, if this is the case, we need to use our sign up errors function, which will reset the state of the component, which will change the state of the component to the value we pass it, which is going to be this sign up error array itself. Cool. So we can save that and just look at the code really quickly just to check everything looks okay. Yep, everything looks good. So let's come back over to the browser, and I'm getting an error here. Okay, so I've just missed here this arrow because it was obviously it's equals to a, this is the ES6 syntax to be creating a function. So let's change that here, save it, let's come back to the browser. Great. Okay, let's go over to the registration page. The first thing we want to do is check that it errors. So let's enter, let's enter a name. So the full name is going to be Jack Black, and the email address will be jack@outlook.com. And the password, let's set this to actually return an error first of all. So let's say 123, and the confirm will be 1234. So this should return an error. And as you can see, we get the error message correctly. So let's enter a valid password and confirm password here. And let's try and register. Yep, so I'm signed in, I'm registered and I'm signed in. So I can obviously move around the site as I want, and I can of course then log out. I could come back over here to log in with that account I just created. So the email, remember, was jack@outlook.com, and enter the password, log in, and again, as you can see, that account was created because I managed to sign in again. Okay, so now that we've completed the refactoring of our sign up component, we're ready to come over to our email password component here and work on refactoring this. So a lot of this is going to be very similar to the work we did refactoring our other components. But of course, this is, again, a very important component. So let's go ahead and refactor this too. So just as the other components, we have this form which calls an onSubmit function, which again doesn't need to be asynchronous anymore. We're going to move this entire try catch out of the component. So we need to call an action here, but we haven't created that action yet. So let's come over to our user actions file. And what we want to do here is just create a new action. So we need to export this as well. We're going to call it the reset password, and it's going to take the user's email, and we're going to pass it dispatch. But what we want to do here is, well, this is also going to be async, and all we need to do here is just take the contents of this try catch and move it into our action. And I'm probably going to move this config. I'm probably going to move that outside of the try catch. Cool. So we have this success callback, and we have this we catch any errors currently. So of course this is calling props. We don't have access to that within our action anymore, so we're going to need to move that back into the component. And we don't have access to the set errors function either. So again, we're going to need to dispatch 2 more actions here just to handle these events within the component. So to do that, we need to come over to our user types file and create 2 more types. The first type we're going to create is going to be called the reset password success. Going to take a string with the same value as the name of the key, and we're going to create another one which is going to be called reset password error. And again, that's just going to take the value of the name of the key itself. Cool. Now that we have defined those types, we can come over to the reducer itself and create the initial state. So this is going to be reset password success, and by default this will be false, and we'll have reset password error, and by default that will be an empty array. So we then just need to create the cases. So we'll create the first case, which is going to be user types dot reset password success, and in this case we're going to return the state with the reset password success equal to action dot payload. And the second case that we're going to create, so that's going to be user types dot reset password error, and in this case we're simply going to return again the state with the reset password error equals to the action dot payload. Perfect. So let's close this file, and we're now ready to actually dispatch the action itself within our reset password action. So let's use the dispatch to dispatch the action. So it's going to take a type. The type will be equal to the user types dot reset password error, and the payload is going to be true. Cool. And in the error case, we're going to again use dispatch, and we're going to set the type to be equal to the user types dot reset password error, and the payload is just going to equal the error itself. Cool. So now that we're handling these events, let's just remove this code here that we commented out earlier. We're ready to actually come back over and use this action within our component. So this is our email password component. We can remove this import from our Firebase utility file. We don't need that anymore. What we do need from React itself is the use effect hook. We need to import something from React Redux. We need two things actually. We need both hooks. We need the use dispatch hook and we need the use selector hook. And of course we also need to import the action we just created as well itself. We can get that from Redux user actions, and it's called the reset password action. Okay, so we need to first of all create our map state. We'll destructure the user state first of all, and we need two things. So we need the reset password success, which will equal the user dot reset password success, and we need reset password error, which will equal user dot reset password error. And then within our component, we can access that by simply creating a constant which destructures from the use selector, call that as a function, and pass it our map state function. And then we can destructure the reset password success and the reset password error. We also need access to dispatch, so I'll create another const called dispatch, which will take the use dispatch Redux hook. We'll call that as a function, and then within our handle submit, what we can do here is we can simply dispatch that action. So we'll say dispatch, and we'll pass it our reset password action, call it as a function, but we need to pass it the user's email. Cool. So now that we're actually handling that, we need to subscribe to these two. We need to update the component and handle the events for success and error. To do that, we're going to use the use effect hook, which takes a function and a dependencies array. We're going to duplicate this twice because we need it twice. The first case is going to be for the reset password success, and in the event of this value changing, we're going to evaluate the value, and if it's true, then we're simply going to push the user to the login page to log in. Now, to handle the error event, we're going to pass this use effect hook the reset password errors array as a dependency. And again, we need to evaluate this for being an array. So we'll say array.isArray, and we'll pass it the reset password array. And we also want to check that the reset password array, errors array, dot length is greater than 0, which means that it contains an error. Now, if this is true, if this evaluates to true, then we're going to call the setErrors function, and we're just going to pass it the value of the reset password error. And that's all we need to do in order to decouple the logic that handles Firebase from the component and to implement the Redux hooks. So let's come back over to the browser. We can access the reset password page by going to login and reset password. At least that's how I've coded this application. Let's enter a random email that does not exist. So we'll just say test@email.com. So we should see an error here. And as you can see, we get the valid error. Let's enter a valid email. So we created this one for jack@outlook.com, And as you can see, I'm redirected to login because that email exists. At this point, we're ready to refactor the last component within our application, and that is our app.js file. Now within this file, we're still using this connect function from React Redux. And this is some legacy code that was written when this component was actually a class. And what it's being used for is actually to map dispatch to props, because we're dispatching this action which sets the current user in our Redux store. We are actually getting the current user object from the store. We are getting that value, but we're actually not using it anywhere within our code. It's just there, but we're not actually using it. So we can actually just remove this entirely. But again, we don't want to use this connect function anymore. Instead, we want to use the use selector Redux hook. So what we're going to do is down here where we export our component, our app component, we're going to delete this line and we're going to replace it and we're just going to export the app component directly. And that's all we need to do there. And then we can actually just completely remove the map state to props function and the map dispatch as well. We don't need either of those. And we're already importing this action up here already because we were using it before. So the only thing that we need to change is this line here directly. And what we need to do is, instead of doing this, all we do is we say const dispatch, because we need access to dispatch. So we'll say use dispatch. We'll call that as a function. And then all we need to do is, where we're using this action, which is in these two places, we just need to wrap this with dispatch. Just like this. That's all you need to do. And then we can save the file. And again, let's come back over to the browser. And let's just log into one of our accounts. So joeblogs@outlook.com, and we'll just set the password as well and log in. And as you can see, we're still getting exactly the same functionality in the site. We've now refactored all of our components to use Redux hooks. But there's one last thing that I want to give you guys as a bonus to this tutorial, which I think is going to just, again, really improve the user experience. So if we come over to the login page, I want to show you something that you may or may not have noticed. All right, so if we go to sign in with Google and we just sign in with an account, I'm going to do that now. You're going to notice that we're not redirected away to the home page. We are logged in. You can see that because the links in our header have changed, and I can log out. But if I was to log in with an email, so for example, jack@outlook.com and my password, then you can see when I log in, I'm redirected. So why is that not happening when I sign in with Google? So let's come back over to the code. And let's go back over to our sign-in page and figure out why this is happening. So the way that it currently works when we sign in with an email and password, right, is we're subscribed to this success state from the Redux store. Whenever this changes, this is where we redirect the user and we handle that success event. This is not getting dispatched for when the user signs in via Google, because we're actually using this middleware, this utility function that we created. We're using this directly on this component. So what we need to do is refactor this a little bit so that it will work in the same way that it works when we dispatch an action to log in via email and password. So let's do that. It's a really simple change, but again, it's really it's expected user behavior, so we should really adhere to that. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new function on our component, and I'm just going to call this const handle Google sign in, and it's just going to equal a function looks something like this. And the first thing that we really need to do is create our action itself that we can call with dispatch. But before we can do that even, let's take a look at something. So we have this sign in with Google. This is the file here. We actually don't need this here anymore, which is coming from our Firebase utility file. Let's come over to that file. So it's in Firebase and utils. And let's just collapse all of this down so it's a little easier to see. This is the sign in with Google that we're currently exporting, right? I'm going to comment this out. I don't want to write it in this way anymore. We're going to turn this into an action rather than a utility function. What we need to export is actually this. So we're going to say export const our Google provider, right? And let's just take this and we're going to move this into our Redux action. So this is our user actions. Let's just paste that here. Now what we want to do is at the top of the file where we're importing from our Firebase utility file, we want to import that Google provider that we just made available from that file, right? And then we'll come down here, and what we want to do is we're not going to pass this function anything, but it is going to take dispatch, right? And it is going to be async, right? And we'll just paste that code there that we took previously. So before we write this any further, we're just going to take this and we're going to import that into our sign-in file. And where we import our actions at the top here, we're going to import this additional action. And let's now scroll down the page, and on our button where we're calling this sign in with Google, previously we were calling that directly, we now want to say handle Google sign in. So this is that function we created here, which calls dispatch, and this dispatch is where we're going to dispatch our new action, which is that sign in with Google action. And now we need to call that as a function. So let's come back over to our actions file, and we're going to do something here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this in a try catch, right? So we're going to have a try catch, which will take and capture an error, and then if we want, we can console log the error. But for now, we're going to comment that line out. Now notice here that we're using this auth library, and again, as you guys already know, we already have access to the auth because again, we're importing that from our utility file as well. And what we'll do here is we will await this. That's an important keyword. So we're using that async await keyword, but we're going to remove that semicolon because we want to use this then callback. And this is going to allow us to pass it a function, and on this, and then what we're going to be able to do is if we come up here to this action we created to sign in the user, here we dispatched this action here with the sign in success type, right? I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put that within this then callback. So in this case, we're dispatching an action which tells our application we've successfully signed in. Right? So let's now save that and come back over to our browser, and let's come back over to login, and let's go sign in with Google. We're still getting the pop-up. Let's sign in, and you'll see this time I'm not only logged in, but I'm also redirected to the home page. There is something really important I need to show you guys. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over and log in. I also have some Redux developer tools open in my DevTools. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign in with my test account. So jack@outlook.com and the password. And let's click on sign in. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to log out of the application. And I'm going to click on log in again. And you're going to notice I can't, no matter how many times I click login, I can't get into it. I just can't do it. So now let's go into the Redux Store and let's figure out what's happened, why this is happening. So looking at the user state from my Redux Store, I can expand that. So I successfully logged out. You can see this user object is null, but the sign in success is still true. The reason is we dispatched an action that would set this to true so we could redirect the user once they signed in, but we never reset this. So when the user logged out, when the user actually logged out, they never actually, we never reset this back to false, which means that because in our code, if we come back over to, for example, our sign-in component, this useEffect method runs every time the component mounts. So because when this component loads, because this will be default to true, this is going to redirect the user every time you try and visit that page. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is that every time that you successfully log in, you need to reset those values. So to do that, we need to create another two actions. We need another reset action, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to our Redux user and our user types, and we're just going to call this reset auth forms. And we're going to add a new case for user types dot reset auth forms, in which case we're going to return the state, but we're going to reset all of these fields. So we're going to reset all of these fields back to their initial values. The only field we're not resetting, right, is our current user, right? That's the only one we're not going to reset. So we can close that now, and we just want to create a simple action, which we're going to export as const, and we're just going to say reset all auth forms, and it's just going to equal a simple function, and we're just going to return an object with the type of user types dot reset auth forms, right? And then what we can do is we can come back over to each of these forms. So we can come into, for example, we can come into our sign-in component, and where we import our actions, we can import the reset all forms action. And now where we reset this form here, we can dispatch another action here where we reset. Now currently we've done this for sign in. We also need to do this for sign up. So when the user is successfully signed up here, we want to dispatch this action here as well. So we'll do that. We'll need to import that as well from our actions here. And finally, we're also going to need to do this on our email password here. So over here where we have our email password, we have this success event. And it's very important you do this, by the way, before you redirect the user. But we want to, of course, dispatch this action as well here. Remember, we need to import it from our actions. So now let's come back over to the browser, and let's come back over to the login page. Let's just reload this in the browser too. And let's try that again. So let's log in. So jack@outlook.com and enter the password. We get redirected. Let's look at the state now. So you can see if we come to the user, you'll see that all of this has been resetted. It's all false. So if I log out now, I can actually come over here, and if I go back to login, I can visit that page successfully. Okay, and that brings us to the end of this video tutorial where we looked at implementing Redux hooks into our application. In the next video, we're going to be looking at adding user levels and an admin level and an admin control panel where you can start adding your products to the store. But before we can sign off from the tutorial, let's just head over to the terminal. I'm going to check in the code, and as you can see, I'm just going to push that up to the repository. And of course, I just want to remind you guys that at the end of each one of these tutorials, I am creating PRs, and I'm going to merge this with master so that if you want to compare the code I've written in this tutorial, or again, you just want to look at the application yourself or clone the repository, feel free to do so. I will be pushing this PR and merging it with master. Once again, I just want to thank you guys for following this video tutorial. But if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe.